We start with portfolio questions today, rural affairs and the environment. Question 1, Mary Fee.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what steps the Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs and the Environment is taking to tackle rural poverty.
Cabinet Secretary Richard Lockhead.
Poverty is an issue that this Government certainly is committed to tackling. It is, of course, affected by a range of factors, including employment, health, housing and access to essential services. Action on these issues is, as you will appreciate, the responsibility of all of my Cabinet colleagues, but we have taken many steps within my own portfolio to increase economic growth, provide skills training, safeguard jobs and provide key services, particularly through LEADER, the funding stream, and also the Scottish Rural Development Programme.
Mary Fee.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer. A few weeks ago, the Poverty Alliance launched its report into rural poverty and the impact on lone parents. Can the Cabinet Secretary inform the Chamber what measures he is taking to improve the welfare of lone parents in rural communities now, who are more at risk of extreme poverty as a result of welfare reform?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I commend the authors on that report, which is a very important report indeed. And of course, the challenges facing lone parents, particularly in the current economic climate, and the welfare reforms which are impacting on them, is very great indeed. And I welcome the member raising this issue in the Chamber today. I should say that in terms of the LEADER funding, for instance, a number of projects that assist lone parents throughout rural Scotland are supported, and we're always looking for ways. But as she also highlighted, the issue of welfare reforms is presenting huge challenges for lone parents. Often they face additional challenges because of rural locations and isolation and so on. And the Tory Lib Dem welfare cuts will indeed have a significant and detrimental impact on vulnerable groups and individuals right across Scotland, and do nothing to tackle child poverty or help lone parents.
Thank you. Question 2, Graham Day.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on direct payments being made to farmers.
Cabinet Secretary Richard Lockhead.
Scottish farmers receive around €600 million a year in direct payments through the Common Agricultural Policy, which includes €29 million in coupled payments through the Scottish Beef Scheme. The Scottish Government is also supporting the need for those direct payments which are vital for Scotland's farmers, particularly those in less favoured areas, and we will continue to urge the UK Government to recognise Scotland's distinct agricultural needs and support our position in the ongoing reform of the Common Agricultural Policy.
Graham Day.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The UK Environment Secretary Owen Paterson made clear to the Oxford Conference earlier this month that he aspires to see an end to Pillar 1 support for farmers and decisions on food production left to the market, something which could have devastating consequences for Scottish agriculture. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that Mr Paterson's concerning comments are further evidence that the future of Scottish farming can be secured only through independence?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, on many issues there are many hectares between the position adopted by Owen Paterson and myself in terms of the future direction of agricultural support. And as I said at the time when he spoke at the Oxford Farming Conference, where once again he called for direct support for Scottish food producers to be phased out as soon as possible, that he was perhaps speaking to farmers who live in the rolling acres of Anglia, but certainly not speaking to Scottish farmers, given that we rely on that kind of support, given the additional challenges farmers, particularly in uplands, face. And thankfully, many other countries within Europe recognise there is a case for ongoing direct support. And I did note that Sir Jim Pace, the former Conservative UK Government Farming Minister, only in the last few days has said that the position of phasing out direct payments so quickly is utterly ludicrous. And the rhetoric from his successor, Owen Paterson, appears to be taking us back to the position adopted by previous governments, which had that utterly ludicrous position of removing farming payments.
Thank you. Alex Ferguson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. No matter what the future holds, and let's face it, we've heard all that before, the fact is that under the reform proposals, basic payments are likely to be capped at a maximum payment of €300,000 with banded reductions within that. I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary shares my slight concerns on what this might impact on the employment situation in some of Scotland's larger farms, although I understand there may be a provision that the reductions could be reduced given if they were to have an impact on employment. Would the Cabinet Secretary share that view, and will he make representations to the UK Government to ensure that they share that view as well?
Cabinet Secretary.
The member is quite right. There is a proposal to cap farming payments across Europe. and I have certainly taken the position that we should not waste negotiating capital opposing that, but we do, on the other hand, want to ensure it's capable of being implemented on the grounds, and it's not full of so many loopholes that businesses just create new businesses to get round the cap. However, I do think also the current suggestion that the cap should also take into account employment levels is something we would seriously want to support. That does make sense, and I can assure the member that is a point we've made to the UK Government in the past.
Thank you. Question 3, Gil Patterson.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to encourage supermarkets to stock quality Scotch lamb?
Cabinet Secretary Richard Lockhead.
In my meetings with the major retailers, I do take every opportunity to highlight the fantastic Scottish products on offer, including our high-quality Scotch lamb. It's clearly important that supermarkets support our sheep producers, particularly against a backdrop of lower farm gate prices. As a consequence of the current market conditions, I met with the National Sheep Association in Scotland on the 23rd of January to discuss the short and long-term difficulties facing the sheep industry, and I hope to make an announcement on possible support for the sector shortly.
Thank you very much. Gil Patterson.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer? As the Cabinet Secretary is well aware that Scotch lamb label forms part of its protected geographic indication, representing superior character, 100% traceability and quality guarantee of stricter production methods and controls required by law. With such an impressive status for our lamb, what steps can the Cabinet Secretary take to highlight this important status to food retailers, especially supermarkets, home and abroad?
Cabinet Secretary.
The member quite rightly highlights that Scotch lamb benefits from traceability and quality, and these, I believe, are criteria which consumers are looking for, and therefore I would hope that every retailer would make sure that consumers have got the opportunity to buy that on our shelves in Scottish supermarkets. Clearly, that's happening in some supermarkets, but not all, and we want all retailers to get behind our sheep sector, given some of the current challenges. We're also working with the industry to look at new export opportunities. It's quite clear there are untapped potential in overseas markets, and we want to make the most of that opportunity as well.
Thank you. Alison Jones.
Thank you. The lack of local abattoirs is a major barrier to all retailers, small or large, stocking Scottish lamb with high welfare standards. How will a new food body for Scotland support more local slaughterhouses to be viable local enterprises, reversing the trend towards mega abattoirs and the detriment these cause to small-scale producers and retailers and to animal welfare?
Secretary.
I know the member and other members have taken a long-term interest in the issue of smaller abattoirs, particularly in our more rural areas. Clearly, we have supported new abattoirs in rural areas through some of our existing funding streams, but some of the challenges facing others are, of course, commercial challenges. If they're not making a profit, sometimes that's clearly the reason why they close down, unfortunately. In terms of the future of a food body, I'm not quite sure what the member is referring to, but in terms of the role of the Food Standards Agency, that is, of course, under review at the moment, and the FSA have a big role to play in terms of regulating smaller abattoirs, and that's certainly something we've discussed with them in the past to see if there's any way of alleviating the regulation and costs.
Good. Question 4, Linda Fabiani.
To ask the Scottish Government what the environmental benefits are of using LED lighting in commercial applications.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
There are a number of commercial applications for LED lighting, for example, street lighting and lighting in offices, and the environmental benefits of using LED lighting include reducing energy use and a subsequent reduction in CO2 emissions. For instance, replacing 1,000 typical halogen reflectors with energy-efficient LED alternatives will actually save 14 tonnes of carbon dioxide per year. For every 200 bulbs, that's the equivalent of taking a car off the road for a year. A substantial component of local authority electricity consumption required for street lighting and work by Scottish Futures Trust indicates that if all street lanterns were converted to LED, it could save local authorities the equivalent of £28 million per annum through electricity bills.
Linda Fabiani.
Does the Minister agree with me that we need much more emphasis on reducing the amount of energy actually required and consumed, rather than the production of energy all the time? And would he agree that it's important to investigate ways of encouraging some potentially high-volume users to take advantage of this technology? I would put forward as examples hospitals and schools.
Minister.
I could certainly agree with that sentiment. It's clearly important. We are looking as a government about how we produce our electricity, but it's equally very important to look at how we improve energy efficiency. And in relation to the point about large users, the Scottish Futures Trust are working with East and West Dunbartonshire councils to prepare street lighting energy efficiency outline business cases, with the hope that that can then subsequently lead to investment in LED lighting.
Thank you. Question 5, Bruce Crawford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions it has had with farmers' representatives regarding the high impact of high costs of fuel and animal feed on the farming sector.
Secretary Richard Lockhead.
I do meet regularly with farmers, and the impact of high input costs such as fuel and animal feed is, as you quite rightly point out, raised frequently, so I am very well aware of the consequences for agriculture in Scotland. While commodity prices are set by international markets and are therefore beyond our control, the Scottish Government does support the industry in a variety of other ways to help farmers manage these costs as well as possible. These and the other challenges are why I was determined to get single farm payment to farmers and crofters out as promptly as possible, resulting in 70% being paid the first possible day, and we have now paid 98% of recipients, putting £437 million into the rural economy.
Very much. Bruce Crawford.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Would the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that at a time when the economy is teetering on the brink of a triple recession and farmers and the agricultural sector are facing huge challenges, it would be wrong-headed of the UK Government to consider increasing the level of fuel duty? And would he also agree with me that a fuel duty regulator would be a simple, effective method to ensure prices remain stable and help give farmers and the agricultural sector confidence about the stability of future fuel prices?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the member does make an important point of the impact of rising fuel costs on agriculture and other rural industries. At a time when both households and businesses are facing rising fuel costs, further increases in fuel duty would clearly be the wrong approach. It doesn't affect just directly the farming businesses themselves, but clearly all their supplies and raw materials increase in price as well due to additional transportation costs. And it's certainly the case, as Bruce Crawford says, that a fuel duty regulator would help address this issue by automatically reducing duty in response to rising oil prices. We have repeatedly called on the UK Government to adopt such an approach, and the UK Government's continued inaction simply highlights the need for Scotland to secure the powers to address this issue directly.
Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what additional advice and financial support the Scottish Government is providing to farmers in view of the recent severe weather, particularly in regards of field drainage, which must be tackled in a sustainable way within guidelines, as we all know. This has particularly impacted on Clyde and Forth NFUS members in my region as well as elsewhere.
Cabinet Secretary.
The recent extreme weather did, of course, have an impact on Scottish agriculture, particularly in some parts of the country, including, no doubt, the member's region, as she highlights. I've had a number of conversations with their farming organisations about this, and the issue of drainage has been raised with me several times. Given that to address this could cost perhaps hundreds of millions of pounds, there's no easy financial solution to helping drainage be improved on all our farms in Scotland. But we are looking at the next SRDP and how that can take into account the need for improving our drainage on farmland. And of course, we've also had the Scottish Environment Agency speaking to farmers to find out how they can be of more assistance in terms of the regulation.
A brief supplementary from Alex Ferguson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Minister will be aware of a recent initiative by Tesco's to increase the amount paid for beef and pork to its dedicated suppliers. Would he accept that the major retailers have a large part to play in ensuring that farmers get a fair price for what they produce, as well as government?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, at a time of cutthroat competition between even more retailers on the scene who want to improve their profits and squeeze perhaps suppliers' margins, they should recognise they do have a responsibility to protect food security in Scotland and make sure that all our primary producers get a decent return. And that's something I constantly raise with our retailers in Scotland, as I know many other members in the Chamber do, and it's something we should keep raising with them. I'm sure consumers are on our side in this argument.
Question 6, Elaine Murray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what steps it is taking to prevent the spread of squirrel pox in Dumfriesshire and the south of Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary. I beg your pardon, Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We are working with a range of partners to carry out grey squirrel control to isolate squirrel pox virus outbreak zones and establish pox containment around these areas in the south of Scotland. The squirrel pox surveillance programme tests diseased red squirrel specimens for signs of squirrel pox virus and other pathogens and undertakes antibody and tissue tests in grey squirrels to detect and map exposure to squirrel pox vaccine. The virus. The programme is supported by Scottish Natural Heritage and Forestry Commission Scotland, and SNH is contributing £350,000 to the project between 2012 and 2014. And SNH have also contributed to funding for the development of a squirrel pox vaccine by the Morden Institute. However, it's likely this project is some years from producing a usable vaccine.
Dr. Murray.
Thank the Minister very much for that reply. And I do support the policy of red squirrel reserves. However, as we know, it only takes the intrusion of one grey squirrel carrying squirrel pox into a red squirrel area, even before it's culled, for that disease to spread. I'm pleased to note that the Minister is aware of the Morden vaccination programme. I wonder what discussions you've maybe had. I understand that the funding at the moment has dried up because the charity which funds it doesn't have the funds just now to keep it going. So I wondered what discussions you and your officials may have had to see whether you can perhaps help that programme to continue for the time being.
Minister. Certainly, the member is quite right. The Morden Research Institute received 3 years funding from the Wildlife Art Trust and SNH to develop a vaccine to protect red squirrels from the squirrel pox virus. And Morden have costed a next phase of further exploring attenuation and dosage at a cost of approximately £160,000. It's likely that the cost of developing and trialling a vaccine for use in the field could cost a further £500,000 and take 5 to 10 years. The trials will also require wild-caught red squirrels, and the Scottish Government and SNH have not yet been approached for funding for the next phase of the trial at this stage.
A brief supplementary from Joan McAlpine, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I draw the Minister's attention to another Dumfriesshire issue raised in the Eskdale and the Liddesdale Advertiser this week on the frightening rise in liver fluke cases in livestock due to the recent spate of wet summers? Can I ask the Minister what has been done to address this issue?
I'm not certain that that's relevant, but nonetheless, if you choose to answer it, do so.
I will attempt to answer it, Presiding Officer. Recent press reports are the result of increasingly increased publicity by SRUC in the light of dramatic increase in diagnosis, rising from 57 cases between October and December of 2011 to over 200 in the same period in 2012. SRUC have highlighted the need for accurate diagnosis and treatment. Vets from SAC Consulting, a division of Scotland's Rural College, that this could be just the tip of the iceberg, and a press release has received widespread coverage in farming and other press and should help raise awareness in the farming community.
Remarkably well briefed for a question on squirrel pox. Yes. Thank you very much. Question 7, Gordon MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it plans to review the impact of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981.
The Scottish Government does not have any plans to review the impact of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981.
Gordon.
The Pentland Regional Park celebrated its 25th anniversary last year. However, in recent years it has seen a reduction in funding and the ranger staff being absorbed into the local authority Parks Department. Given these changes, does the Government have any plans to protect regional parks by giving them a similar status as national parks?
Claire Baker. Oh, I beg your pardon. I'm losing it. Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm aware that Pentland Hills Regional Park is an important area of countryside in a regional context and provides opportunities for outdoor recreation alongside farming and other land uses. Our national parks, on the other hand, are designated as areas of the very highest national value for their landscape, wildlife and cultural heritage, and they are accountable to Scottish ministers. Scotland's 3 regional parks and 2 national parks all have an important role to play in encouraging people in the Year of Natural Scotland to enjoy the outdoors. However, the Government has not had any plans to redesignate regional parks as national parks.
Claire Baker.
The Wildlife and Countryside Act is enforced by wildlife crime officers across Scotland, and the Minister will be aware of some concerns over their future. Can he give any assurances that the important work carried out by wildlife crime officers will be protected and developed by the Police Service for Scotland?
Minister.
I'm certainly happy to give a commitment to Claire Baker that we have a strong commitment to the continuing work of the Wildlife Crime Unit, and indeed I welcome the decision by the UK Minister to continue funding for the foreseeable future, and hope that gives a good basis for that unit to continue its important work in the countryside.
Thank you very much. We now move to Justice and Law Officers' questions to them. Question 1, George Adam.
To ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to tackle metal thefts.
Lord Advocate.
Tackling metal theft is a priority for the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service and the Scottish Government. The range of action by Scottish Government includes plans to tighten regulation of scrap metal dealers by raising the level of turnover for exemption from the licensing scheme to £1 million from the 20th of February. There are also proposals to prohibit the payment of cash for metal to remove access to ready cash by criminals. These measures are complemented by a robust prosecution policy announced by the Solicitor General last year. The combination of the work of prosecutors, the police and Scottish Government policies should send a clear message that involvement in metal theft at any level will not be tolerated.
George Adam.
Thank you for the answer. There has been recent spate of lead thefts from the roof of one of Paisley's most historic buildings, the Thomas Coates Memorial Church. I, along with other stakeholders, have been working towards securing this church's future. However, these thefts have been proven to be a major setback. Do you agree with me that those responsible need to be prosecuted with the full force of the law?
Lord Advocate.
I obviously can't comment on the case mentioned by Mr Adam as proceedings are live. What I can say is that I agree that metal theft is a problem which has to be tackled robustly by the law. That's why a robust prosecution policy has been developed for metal theft, which takes account of the economic, social, emotional and cultural effect of the theft. It has regard to whether the offender has links to serious and organised crime, and if so, the labelling of the charge will reflect this, and consideration is also given to the utilisation of proceeds of crime legislation in every case. A good example of a successful prosecution where the economic value of the metal was far exceeded by the economic damage caused by the theft is an Ayrshire case where a man was convicted of metal theft and sentenced to imprisonment for theft of 150 yards of BT cable worth around £1,000. But it was from a live exchange and put out the phones in the area for 3 days, including emergency numbers, and cost around £220,000 to fix. The police have also made metal theft a priority, and the member will recollect the ACPOS Cut-Out Metal Theft campaign, which I and I'm sure other members will support.
Graham Pearson.
Presiding Officer, perhaps the Lord Advocate could rehearse for us the extent of the ban that's applied in terms of cash payments. He may well be aware that I lodged a motion in March of this year inviting ministers to take steps to ensure that even the sale of small amounts of metal should be prescribed in terms of cash sales and that it should be credit our bank accounts. Could he perhaps shed some light?
Lord Advocate.
Well, my understanding is that that is due to come into force in the near future. I agree with him that it is a worthy aim to prevent access to ready cash. It's a market which, as a member knows, will be exploited by criminals, including serious and organised criminals. And it's very important that you know the source of the money and where it is going, and that would assist law enforcement in dealing with the scourge of metal theft in this country.
Question 2, Anne McTaggart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what the Lord Advocate's position is of the legal validity standing of the agreement between the UK and Scottish Governments on an independence referendum.
Advocate.
As a member will be aware, there is a long-standing convention that the Government does not disclose whether law officers have or have not advised in any particular matter. The content of any such legal advice would also be confidential. That convention is recognised in paragraph 235 of the Scottish Ministerial Code.
Anne McTaggart.
Thank you. On the 7th of November 2012, in response to a question by my colleague Mark Griffin MSP, the Lord Advocate stated that the Edinburgh Agreement, in laying out an agreed route to independence, provided the basis upon which specific legal advice could be sought. However, he will be aware that the Advocate-General for Scotland has stated in a written answer published this morning that the agreement signed by both the UK and Scottish Governments on the 15th of November 2012 is a non-statutory statement of the agreement reached between the two governments, and that further it has no relevance to matters beyond the process for holding a referendum. In light of this, does the Lord Advocate stand by in full his previous responses that the agreement itself provided a legitimate trigger in order to release or authorise the release of legal advice in EU membership?
Lord Advocate.
Well, I haven't read the Advocate General's statement, which the member advises was issued this morning. But what I would say is that I stand by what I said to this chamber on the date which the member referred to. It's a long-standing convention which is applied by the UK Government, the Scottish Government and the governments in other Commonwealth countries that you do not disclose whether or not legal advice has been given or sought from law officers. There's a number of reasons for that convention. It's important that a government is able to consult its most senior legal advisers without fear that either the advice itself or the fact that the advice was requested or not will be disclosed. It allows advice to be given frankly, precisely because it's private, and disclosure of the occasions when advice has or has not been sought from the law officers with the effect of disclosing various matters which the government judges to have a particularly high political priority or are ascertained to be a particular legal difficulty or controversy. Now, it's not for me to discuss or even confirm whether or not legal advice has been given, or even discussions which may or may have taken place, may or may not have taken place between UK and Scottish Government law officers. I've noted what you've said about the Advocate General's comments. That's a matter for him. I've articulated my position in the matter, and I fully intend to stand by the Law Officers Convention and the Ministerial Code.
Absolutely. Many thanks. Question 3, Mike Mackenzie.
To ask the Scottish Government what consideration has been given to the impact that potential court closures may have on island communities in relation to travel.
Secretary Kenny McCaskill.
The Scottish Court Service continues to give careful consideration to issues of access to justice. Their consultation paper lays out a series of principles on access to justice that have shaped the proposals put forward. As the consultation paper sets out, island courts would remain in Lerwick, Kirkwall, Stornoway, Lochmaddy and Portree.
Mackenzie.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, and wonder if he agrees with me that there is also scope for greater consideration of travelling times and difficulties when scheduling court cases, especially those that involve travel to and from islands, and that such consideration of scheduling could also lead to efficiencies in the court system.
Cabinet Secretary.
Absolutely. I think the member makes an important point. If there is to be any diminution in the number of courts, then these are factors. But these are factors that have always been considered by the court service. I do remember many years ago as a practising defence agent being involved in a trial in Lochmaddy where the scheduling of the cases depended upon which ferry was coming from Erisgate, Barra, or indeed which plane was being taken by whom at whatever time. So these have always been matters taken on board, both in particular in island communities, but indeed in other communities where bus timetabling has also been a factor, and I can give the member the assurance that they will continue to be factors and criteria that will be considered by the Scottish Court Service.
Lewis MacDonald.
Thank you very much. Can the Cabinet Secretary give us some information today on when we will be told about responses to proposals for court closures in the islands and elsewhere, and when he intends to make a decision on whether to bring forward a measure to close Scottish courts?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as the member knows, it's the Scottish Court Service that has been carrying out the consultation. The consultation has since closed. I have no doubt that the Lord President will be considering matters with the Chief Executive and with others involved, and it will be a matter for him to decide where he wishes to take it. If he wishes to take it further, then doubtless he will be in communication with me, and I will notify that to this Parliament.
Thank you. Question 4, Annabel Goldie.
The Scottish Government what its position is on the adequacy of the number of police officers carrying out duties in communities.
Cabinet Secretary.
We currently have a record number of police officers in Scotland, which has contributed to safer and stronger communities, with recorded crime at a 37-year low. Following police reform, each local authority area will have a designated local police commander who will work more closely than ever before with locally elected councillors and community planning partnerships to shape local services and prioritise local needs.
Honourable Goldie.
Deputy Presiding Officer, in 2006 my party forced the SNP government to commit to 1,000 extra police officers. and I have been informed in a response to a Freedom of Information request that the total number of officers at their desks on restricted duties has risen from 560 in 2006 to 1,412 in 2011. Clearly that has a dramatic impact on a number of police officers in our communities. What is the Cabinet Secretary going to do to restore the numbers of officers in our communities?
Kenny McCaskill.
Well, these are fundamentally matters for the Chief Constable, who's obviously held to account by the Scottish Police Authority. What I can say is that police officers tend to be on restricted duties in a variety of circumstances. For example, pregnancy. And indeed, as we have an increase in the number of female officers, that's a factor that has to be taken into consideration. Equally, officers who have suffered injuries, and it may be a matter of some lightheartedness to Jenny Mara, but officers who do suffer injuries, and tragically far too many officers do suffer injuries in the course of their duties, also have to be protected from these matters. So these are matters that are discussed between management and unions, between the Scottish Police Federation, as I met earlier, and indeed, as I say, the Chief who is ultimately responsible.
Okay, question 5, Dave Thompson.
To ask the Scottish Government what progress is being made by the Police Service of Scotland to configure its backroom functions.
Cabinet Secretary Kenny McCaskill.
At the Scottish Police Authority meeting on Friday 18th January, the SPA and the Police Service of Scotland reached agreement on the high-level design principles for 8 key corporate services. Joint work between the SPA and the Police Service of Scotland is now taking place to implement the agreement that has been reached, and proposals for the remaining services are expected to be presented to the next meeting of the SPA board in February.
Dave Thompson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his reply. Despite some rationalisation of backroom functions, there will obviously be many support jobs in the new Scottish Police Force, and I am pleased to hear that progress is being made in relation to that. And I know the Cabinet Secretary agrees that the whole of Scotland must benefit from these jobs, and I want to ensure that Highland gets its fair share. Does the Cabinet Secretary therefore agree that some Scotland-wide support functions which are not location-dependent must be established in the Highlands on the basis of equity and inclusivity?
Well, I know the member's concern on this. It's a matter he's raised for some period of time. The vast majority, I think, of support staff, it should be pointed out, will see no immediate change to their place of work on 1st April. Decisions thereafter will be a matter for the Scottish Police Authority and the Police Service of Scotland. I do believe that progress is being made in those discussions. I also do know that it's recognised by the Chair, and I believe by the other members of the authority, that the whole of Scotland has to be recognised because it is the Police Service of Scotland. And if it's of any interest, I did recently, as I mentioned, I think in an earlier question, come from a meeting this morning with the Association of Police Superintendents in Scotland, who I think would be fair to say have a great deal of sympathy with the point the member makes.
Jenny Mara.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary can give us any indication of the current cost of the reform process. I recently asked him in a written PQ how many staff from each police force have been assigned to work in the single service reform team units. The Scottish Government doesn't hold this information. What the salary cost has been of time allocated by each police force to the single service reform team units. The Scottish Government does not hold the requested information. Can the Cabinet Secretary give us any information, please, on the cost of this reform process?
Cabinet Secretary.
Sometimes seem to forget that actually Labour supported a single service. Jenny Mara seems to have spent all her time criticising the position of moving towards a single police service of Scotland. There do have to be hard challenges taken in that. There do have to be hard decisions taken by the Police Service of Scotland and indeed by the Scottish Police Authority. But the single Police Service of Scotland will bring great benefits, will bring savings and will, most importantly of all, avoid what is playing out south of the border, whereas almost as many officers as serve in Scotland will be lost south of the border, and the terms and conditions of those who serve are under attack, and even today we had further proposals to attack the terms and conditions of those who serve.
Question 6, Adam Ingram.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its priorities are for sentencing policy.
Cabinet Secretary.
At the heart of our approach is the commitment to maintain the independence of Scotland's judiciary in reaching sentencing decisions relevant to each case. That independence is fundamental to guaranteeing fair trials. Alongside judicial independence, we will continue to keep sentencing policy under review and bring forward proposals to Parliament as appropriate to strengthen and clarify the legislative framework within which individual sentencing decisions are taken. And we are also discussing with the Lord President arrangements for establishing, before the end of this Parliament, a Scottish Sentencing Council.
Adam Ingram.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his response. Perhaps he could tell me whether that Sentencing Council would actually review sentencing practices which to ordinary citizens do not accord with the proposition that the punishment should fit the crime. For example, a recent spate of housebreakings in Girvan resulted in 2 perpetrators being caught, tried in Ayr Sheriff Court and sentenced to just 6 months and 9 months respectively. Under early release provisions, these men will be back in the streets in half that time. The Cabinet Secretary will appreciate that local people feel badly let down by a system which deals so lightly with criminals who have violated their homes.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I first of all say that I think the member makes a vital point. Housebreaking is an extremely serious offence. It's viewed that way by the police, by the prosecution service and indeed by the judiciary. It violates the trust. It can cause great trauma, as I know, for speaking to those involved in Victim Support Scotland and indeed whether it's Procurator Fiscals or indeed the police service about the significant difficulties and indeed the knock-on effects that can go for many, many a year. So that is taken very seriously. Equally, though, we have to remember that sentencing is ultimately a matter for the judiciary, but I did meet with the Lord President, indeed just on Friday past. I think they take on board matters. I think we are also clear that the steps being taken in terms of judicial training are progressing. The new Judicial Studies Complex up at the Parliament House is, I think, going to be of great benefit to make sure that we can provide that information to sentencers so that they can understand the consequences, the effects, and that, as I say, I think will be of benefit. So I think I can give the member the assurance that these matters will be dealt with by the Sentencing Council, not so much the individual aspects, but the whole nature and the gamut of the effect it can have, not just upon individuals, but entire communities, which I think is a valid point being made by the member.
Yeah, question 7, Maureen Watt.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had or will have with the new local police commanders for Aberdeen, Aberdeenshire and Moray.
Cabinet Secretary.
Working very closely with all the new local commanders as we support them and their partners to trial new local scrutiny and engagement arrangements before they go live on 1st April. Both the local commander for Aberdeen City and the local commander for Aberdeenshire and Moray are regular attendees at our quarterly network events, and the 2 national advisers we fund through the Improvement Service visited the North East Pathfinders on 18th January.
Maureen Watt.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The team of 14 local police commanders who will serve under the single Scottish Police Service will be developing and implementing local policing plans which are specific to each council ward and are intended to ensure policing across Scotland reflects the needs of our diverse communities. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise us to what input individuals and groups from the local community have had or will have in the future in developing these plans and how local priorities are informed and agreed upon?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the Police Service of Scotland, as the member has correctly said, has made a commitment that there will be community engagement plans for all 353 multi-member wards across Scotland, and these will play a key role in informing local authority level policing plans. The national guidance we published on 17th January emphasises how important it is that local people have a say in policing, how policing is delivered locally, and we will be supporting local partners to make sure that the good practice that emerges from the ongoing Pathfinders is replicated against Scotland. What I can give the member the assurance is that it is recognised that to make our communities as safe as they can be, it is not simply a matter for the police and councillors. They do have to engage with all those others who have been serving in community planning partnerships. It's because it's the working collectively that we make sure communities are as safe as they can be.
Thank you. Question 8, Angus MacDonald.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it has taken to ensure that combating wildlife crime is a priority for the Police Service of Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary.
Tackling wildlife crime continues to be a priority for the Scottish Government. It will be a matter for the Chief Constable to decide how to best deploy the resources available to him to deliver a Police Service of Scotland priorities, but that includes, obviously, combating wildlife crime.
Angus MacDonald. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his reply. There have been mixed reports in the past on the effectiveness of the policing of wildlife crime in a number of Scottish police authorities. What can the Justice Secretary do to ensure that existing best practice in exemplary authorities becomes standard practice in the new national force?
I think the member makes a fair point. There has been some patchy matters, but I think it's appropriate that we recognise that the single service offers an opportunity to level up, to make sure that the good work that we know is ongoing is replicated throughout the length and breadth of Scotland. Because I think it's also known that wildlife crime is not simply a matter that troubles and is of concern in rural areas, but also in urban areas. And I think this offers an opportunity through the Police Service of Scotland to make sure that every area of Scotland gets the best possible police service, especially with regard to wildlife crime.
Many thanks. And that concludes portfolio questions.